Welcome to the webinar, everybody. We're just going to give a moment or two for people to enter the Zoom room, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So we'll be back in just a moment. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I see there's still some additional people entering the call, but for the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's webinar on providing telehealth services and instruction to students and clients with a focus on those with developmental disabilities and those who are on the autism spectrum. This webinar is sponsored by the Northeast and Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, or MHTTC, housed at Rutgers School of Health Professions, Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions. My name is Ann Murphy, and I'm the director of the center, and I'll be facilitating the webinar today, along with my colleague, Katia Rivera, who you'll see in the chat. The MHTTC is funded by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, to enhance the capacity of the behavioral health and other related workforces to deliver evidence-based and empirically supported practices to individuals with mental illnesses. We also have additional supplemental funding from SAMHSA focused on school mental health, in which we are charged with training and providing technical assistance to schools, districts, and other education-related services to enhance their capacity to be able to address students' mental health concerns. We encourage you to sign up for our email listserv at the link at the bottom of this slide so that you can continue to receive notices about our upcoming activities as well as our products and resources. So please feel free to follow that link. You can also find us by going to mhttcnetwork.org and going to find your center. There's a center in each of the 10 federal regions. Our region, as I mentioned, is the Northeast and Caribbean. So if you click Find Your Center and then go to Northeast and Caribbean, it'll take you to our site. Before we begin the webinar, I wanted to quickly review a few housekeeping items. We will be distributing a very brief survey at the completion of this webinar. So we would ask that you complete the survey that you receive via email following this webinar. We value your feedback. We use it to help improve our activities and inform our future activities. The surveys are also important because our continued funding is linked to the completion of these surveys, as SAMHSA uses it as a way to gauge both the quality of our services and the participation in our services. The survey is very brief. It takes about 1 to 2 minutes to complete, and so we thank you in advance for your feedback. We did also want to let you know that this video is being recorded. It will be posted on our website along with the PowerPoint slides and a list of resources following the webinar. Okay, so now getting to the exciting part. Our presenter today is Cindy Policastro-Smith. She's a teacher and practicing board certified behavior analyst with over 25 years of experience. She started out in the field providing ABA services to clients on the autism spectrum, and she moved on to teaching students with autism, both at the intermediate and elementary grades. Currently, she teaches a self-contained class of students with autism for the Toms River Regional School District in New Jersey, and works as a clinical supervisor at the Family Resource Network, where she trains and oversees staff providing supervision in-home ABA services. We're very happy to have her with us today to provide us some guidance in this difficult time, providing services and supports to all of our students. Before I turn it over to her, I did also want to let you know that you are welcome to utilize the chat box to communicate with myself, my colleague, colleagues Kati and PJ in the chat box. And also if you have questions for our presenter, if you want to include them in the chat, we will pose them to Cindy at the end of the webinar during the Q&A. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Cindy. Thanks so much for being with us.
First of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be able to share some information with my colleagues during these trying times when we're all trying to get up and running with telehealth services and running our virtual classrooms. So what we're going to go over today is we're going to go over the technology piece, discrete trial, natural environment training, direct interaction with your clients, guiding caregivers' interactions with the client while you're supervising that, for the format for sessions, for telehealth sessions, for in vitro classroom sessions, the materials that are available for sessions, how we go about taking data, social emotional learning and incorporating that into telehealth or virtual classrooms, and then resources that are available. Next slide. So with the technology for telehealth services and for virtual classrooms, most school systems are using Google Classrooms, and in Google Classrooms, there's Google Docs, there's Google Screens, there's an ability to stream items to track student data. Google Classroom is the best way to go about running a virtual classroom. When we're providing in-home services via the telehealth screen for our ABA clients or counseling clients, there are various software platforms or internet platforms that are available. Zoom for Healthcare, VC, DoxyMe, TerraLink, and Simple Practice are good examples of ones that meet the HIPAA requirements and are pretty easy to navigate. The one qualification I will give you that is that with DoxyMe, that is a wonderful platform for counseling. It does not work well for providing ABA services because you cannot have more than 2 people on that platform at a time. If your agency is providing ABA services, you would need to have the BCBA visit the telehealth session. So there would need to be 3 people on, and Doxy does not allow for that. Google Hangout, Google Meet, Microsoft Teams, GoToMeetings are also places where we all are gathering for our virtual meetings. It's important when you're providing therapy, whether it's through counseling or whether you're providing ABA services, that you have a telehealth consent form that you provide and that the client signs prior to service and that you also sign. You need to keep these documents. You will be required to submit them to insurance companies in order to document your services. Next slide. So some tips. It's important to structure telehealth sessions in a way that they provide information, that they provide training and opportunities to give information, to teach, to provide therapeutic support, but we need to do it in a manner that is respectful of HIPAA regulations and is respectful of the client and protecting their privacy. Everybody should be, you should be prohibiting anyone who is in your school system or working with your agency from utilizing areas that are public. I mean, It's a little easier right now because we really don't have many public places open, but moving forward, that is more of an issue. So those connections really have to be in a private room or a private office. A lot of people are home. It is a struggle when you have your own children who you are providing home instruction for, but it's very important that when we're doing a telehealth session, that has to be very private. You need to have the door shut. You can't have people walking in. You can't have a spouse or a family member or a roommate coming in the area when you are on the screen. It's not private, and that has to be protected. Generally, organizations have a service disclaimer that can be read to the legal guardian starting every session. We don't need to do this for our virtual classrooms, but in therapy sessions, it's important. It's important to complete and document personal identification checks before starting every session. We need to know the client's address, zip code, information, email. Establish emergency situation guidelines, what's going to go on if during the course of an ABA session or a therapy session, it becomes an antecedent for some challenging behavior, how that's going to be handled at that point. Really seek consent before every session, make sure everybody is on board, and prohibit public internet connections. Next slide. So how should a session be formatted? The way to format a session is based upon the characteristics, the strengths, and the weaknesses of your kiddo, of your client, of your student. The format for the session should be developed before engaging in the session. You're moving from being face-to-face with a kiddo, with a client. You want to make sure you plan out how that session is going to go so that you are prepared. I generally have an outline in front of me that I've put together beforehand. When I'm supervising an ABA program, there are many goals and objectives in the program that I'm not going to be accessing during the shorter telehealth session. Sometimes because it's harder to implement that during telehealth, and sometimes because there's not enough time. I'm going to make sure that I have what I'm going to cover, how I'm going to go about it, and the materials and the links that I need for it, all organized before the session starts. I'm going to instruct the caregiver on how to prepare the telehealth environment and materials before the session begins, either through email or text or through a phone call. I let the caregiver know where the materials were located in the house that we had present, or I give them a list of things to identify in the house. I instruct them to make sure any language boards, textbooks, iPads, augmentative apps are charged and ready to go prior to the session. I determine whether or not a client's going to need some pairing sessions with the technology before going ahead and making demands on the platform. I have an example of a client who was doing okay with our telehealth sessions, but as soon as the mother felt like it was okay, she started to have screen sessions with the OT and the PT from school and the teacher. And at that point, the screen became aversive. So we went to a pairing situation where I streamed things that he liked to watch, things that were enjoyable to him on the screen. And I was present, the behavior technician were present, we commented back and forth, and then we slowly added the demands into the session. When you're approaching telehealth, it's important to approach it like you would approach a face-to-face session. So you're going to make those adjustments that you need to make. You also need to keep in mind that sometimes some of our kiddos, some of our clients are not as familiar with interacting on a screen, and they may need some support in that direction. That goes for the caregiver as well. In order for the telehealth session to work, you might need to work with the caregiver so that the caregiver is able to access the platform And if they're running into difficulties, that you can provide them some support. I generally try to do a dry run with the parent or the caregiver prior to engaging with the client so that I know that the parent can navigate the system. I did this with the parents in the caregivers in my classroom. Some of them had a lot of difficulty initially accessing the Google Classroom. There's some issues with Google where if the caregiver's computer, it's their profile that's on the computer, and generally it goes straight to that. You have to shift that and create a profile for the client, for the child. When you're using Google Classroom, generally only people who are involved in the school system. So the children have an email ID, and it's not going to recognize the parent, it's going to recognize the child. So you have to navigate those things in order to be successful first. Next slide, please. So discrete trial or natural environment training. So how are we going to go about and provide those ABA services that we're familiar providing for our clients in a telehealth environment? The decision to focus on the discrete trial or the natural environment training should be based upon the goals and objectives in the client's treatment plan or in their IEP from school, their individual education plan, and on the individual characteristics of the client. We are not going to just go in and remake things. We're going to base what we're teaching, we're going to base our therapeutic support on the goals and the objectives that have been identified for that client, for that student previously. Both natural environment training and discrete trial can be effectively targeted using telehealth services. The decision to directly engage with the client, with the kiddo, or to guide the parent in engaging with the client, with the student, or the child in the targeted activity should be based upon the client's need for hands-on prompting and on the client's ability to attend to the teacher or therapist via the screen. I have been very successful with guiding parents to run programs so that what the telehealth session looks like is me directing the parent what to do and providing the parent and the child, the student, feedback. I've also been successful with some students with directly engaging them through the telescreen. So the parent is there to support them when they need it and to make sure that the technology is running smoothly, but they don't need to be as hands-on. The decision about how that is going to play out is based upon your student, your child's functioning level, and how they're reacting to the telehealth environment. It's really a decision that's ongoing and is made via the session, during the session. A combination of both direct engagement via the screen and engagement through guiding the caregiver can be used during the session. I often use a combination of both where I'm engaging with the student directly and the parent is providing that prompting, that support that ordinarily would be happening. That's when you're doing direct instruction. If you're in a supervisory role, you are going to be supervising the behavior technician or the direct instructor who is working with the individual child, and you're also going to be interacting with the caregiver. So when you are in a supervisory role as a BCBA, you're actually going to be providing feedback to 3 different individuals at that point. You're going to be providing feedback to the client, you're going to be providing feedback to the caregiver, and you're also going to be providing feedback to the behavior technician. When I am engaging in a telehealth session with the behavior technician, I stay on the Zoom or the session with the technician after the caregiver and client are no longer on the platform. That gives me an opportunity, that will give you an opportunity to give feedback to the therapist, to the behavior technician on what went on during the session, what's going really well, what needs a little changing, things that could make things run more smoothly, things that you can add, the kind of feedback that you really don't want to give in front of a caregiver, but that are important to give to the therapist or to the behavior technician so that you are providing the support and the supervision that's necessary for applied behavior analysis to be successful. Next slide, please. So utilizing natural environment training during telehealth services. So what do I mean when I talk about natural environment training? Natural environment training is utilizing a situation in the child's natural environment. It's not set up knee-to-knee instruction. It could be a play situation. It could be the child engaging in getting dressed or eating or doing any of the daily living skills that they engage in. You're going to use the opportunity of the natural environment to be able to give instruction, to give support in a more informal way. A key is to set the environment up before telehealth session begins. If I'm going to work on play skills with a child, with a student, I'm going to ask the caregiver to set up the play scenario and put the screen, the computer or the iPad or the phone in a way that I am going to be able to view what the play looks like. So an example would be setting up a play scenario in a play kitchen before the session begins. Then the parent or the caregiver interacting with the child during play to work on the play themes, the scenarios with the child, to work on labeling, to work on having the child requests, answering WH questions, receptive feature function class questions in a more natural way while we're playing with items that are familiar and reinforcing to the student. These sessions can work on all of those things that we target during discrete trial sessions, but they can be done in a more informal way and a more mixed and varied way. Next slide, please. Daily living skills are skills that are very important for our clients to engage in, and during this particular time is a wonderful time to be able to target them. Families are home, families are with each other all the time. It's a wonderful time to have kids start to do some chores and to provide some support with that. I determine with the caregiver what chores, what daily living skills they want to target, or I use the ones that are already identified in their goals and objectives in their assessment plan or in their IEP. I provide visual checklists, a task analysis prior to those sessions. You can share those through attachments, and you can email them to parents. You can mail them to parents. I give the parents links for videos so that we can play those beforehand, to use video modeling so that the client, the child, can see those daily living skills being done by other people, and then they can model them. It's very important to supply the visual supports in the checklist that we would supply if we were in the home, and not just go off of the telehealth screen. Providing those supplemental materials is very important for our individuals to be able to be successful. Parents aren't necessarily, caregivers aren't necessarily going to be able to do that task analysis. So when they're prompting the child to go through a dressing sequence or brushing their teeth, setting the table, running the vacuum cleaner, they're not going to know all of the steps that we want them to go through. And they're not going to know the prompting level and how to fade that prompting level. We're going to have to supply that to them. Some of it we can supply through mailing it or email, and the other piece of it is we can give them vocal guidance while they're engaging in those tasks with their youth. We can give them specific instructions on what to have the child do and how much prompting to provide and how to fade it back. Google Docs, Google Slides, recorded videos, and video streamed from YouTube are great ways to import information onto the telehealth screen. You can share those, and the parent will have a better idea of what to do, or the client will have an opportunity to model those. When we're talking about higher functioning individuals who are working on social skills, the videos streamed from YouTube are a good opportunity to work on those social skills, to see them in action and to be able to talk about them. Guiding caregivers through prompting clients and fading that prompting during daily living tasks is a very important component to the telehealth and can be a little challenging. What I've done when I've had a situation where I was having a hard time communicating to a parent specifically what I wanted them to do was I had my granddaughter work with me, and I gave her directions and she acted it out, and then I fine-tuned it to see and asked for clarification. So she told me the things that I was saying that was making it not so clear. Laminating visual supports and checklists and mailing them to our clients can be very important with our early learners, where those visuals have to be a little more destruct-proof and located. An example would be a sequence for brushing teeth or showering in the bathroom. Laminating them so that they can be attached to the wall in the bathroom and survive over time is important. Those supplemental materials are the things that are really going to help our telehealth sessions work. Next slide, please. So discrete trial instruction. So discrete trial is a very specific way of supplying teaching to students. For some students, the teacher therapist can give the direction via the screen and have the student interact with the materials that the caregiver has arranged as per the teacher or therapist direction. The caregiver can then be guided to prompt, fade prompting, remove, and represent those material and to provide reinforcement. So an example of that would be if I had an early learner and we were learning shapes, we were learning receptive shape ID. I would have had the parent access the material, either the shape cards or the shape pieces from a puzzle, and explain to them how many to put out at a time and how to prompt the child if the child was not following my direction, how to remove the materials, how to provide reinforcement, the things to say, great job. If the child was using primary reinforcers, to have them available, whether they were M&Ms or little pieces of pretzels, whether the child was given an opportunity to have an iPad for a minute or two or interaction with another toy or a sensory item. That would all be outlined with the caregiver ahead of time, and the caregiver is being our hands. So we're the voice and they're our hands, and they're prompting the child to engage in the activity that we're asking them to. With a lot of our early learners, that physical prompting is very important for learning. The caregiver is our key to being able to provide that prompting when we're not present. If the student cannot engage in the directions from the screen at all, then the caregiver is going to also not only provide the prompting, but the caregiver is going to give the direction to the student that the therapist or teacher gives to them through the screen. So we're going to tell the caregiver or the parents what to say, they're going to say it, and then they're going to go ahead and finish the sequence. It's important to provide very specific instruction on how to prompt a student, including where to stand, how to move a student to follow a direction, and how to fade the prompting. I practice giving the directions prior to directing the caregiver so that the caregiver understands what I'm saying through a phone call or through the telehealth screen before the client's present. We'll go over all of those things, and the caregiver can ask me questions, so we're more likely to have a successful session. It's important to remember that the client is receiving reinforcement. This is not always so typical. We're used to providing reinforcement when we're instructing, but it's not very typical for a parent to give little M&Ms or pieces of a cracker or chip pretty frequently across giving directions. So we really need to make this clear and explain the reasons that we're doing that. When we're doing discrete trial, sometimes we can engage the students in direct interaction with the screen by utilizing boom cards. Boom cards you can access via the internet. You can Google them. You can go to the site. There are a lot of free boom cards that you can load. You can buy boom cards. You can also create your own boom cards. You can create a classroom and a profile for each of your students and have specific boom cards assigned to them. You can have boom cards where you, it's called a fast access. They give you a pin, you generate a pin, and you have the link. It won't track the data, but you can put that in your lesson plan right away, or you can create the profile where you're also going to create the option so that every time that child engages with that boom card, data is taken. So you know how the child's doing and you can be able to track that over time. Next screen, please. So the link for boom cards is at the bottom. So you can copy that link and go to it. And next screen, please. So this is what it's going to look like when you go there, and you're going to click on the button to sign in. You're going to create a classroom. You're going to create first a user profile. You're going to click on teacher. You're going to create a user profile, and then you can create a classroom, and you can get yourself set up so that you have specific boom cards in your library. And then when you go into your library, you can pull those boom cards out to assign to specific students or clients. Next slide, please. Pairing during telehealth. I talked about this a little bit before, but I wanted to mention it again. It's very important to establish a rapport on the telehealth platform. You may have already had a rapport with the client or with the parent or with your behavior technician or therapist, but you need to have that generalized to the platform. And the manner in which you pair depends upon the individual characteristics of the client. I spend time chatting with a parent on the telephone or through email before we're even on the platform. This way the parent is comfortable and knows what to expect. When I'm inviting parents to a Google meeting where I'm interacting with them and their individual child, or I'm inviting their child, their student, to Google Hangouts and the whole class is going to be there, I contact each of those parents ahead of time and describe exactly what's going on, what we're looking for, what they can expect. It's important that everybody is on the same page. When I have a child that's new to the screen or new to telehealth, I'm going to chat, I'm going to pair, we're going to play, just like we would do the first sessions when we first get to know a client. And then I'm going to gradually add the demands in, and over like by the 4th or the 5th telehealth session, then we can be back to where we were previously. It's important to provide support and to go a little slowly right now. Everybody is feeling a little stressed due to COVID. Caregivers are stressed, teachers are stressed, therapists are stressed, behavior technicians are stressed. Bringing down everybody's anxiety level that's related to being on the computer, to utilizing technology when they're not familiar with it, is very important for the success of these telehealth sessions. If a client regularly engages in activities or items that are not related to a screen, have the client engage with those activities while you're on the screen and the caregiver is present and you're talking to them, and then demands can be gradually added to the session. For clients who access a lot of material, whether it's YouTube videos or other things on their screens generally, you can import that and share that with them on the telehealth screen and then gradually add demands. You can continue to utilize those YouTube clips or other things that they're familiar with as reinforcers during instruction. So you get through an exercise, you get through a set of goals and objectives that you're working on, and then that kiddo, that student has 5 minutes that they can interact with the video with you on the telehealth screen. They will be much more likely to come to the screen and pay attention with you the next time they're scheduled for a session if they're encountering some fun and some reinforcement during the session. It's important to talk with them during that, to relate with them so that you're also being paired with the material that's on the screen. That's one of the ways that the YouTube content can also you can come to represent some of that. Just like when you're first learning with an early learner and you're pairing yourself in praise with a little M&M or a piece of pretzel, and you become reinforcing because you've been being paired with things that are reinforcing. The same is true of sharing the content that they like on the screen instead of just having it be work on the screen. Next slide, please. So taking data. So in ABA, it's very important that we take data. It's very important as teachers that we have data, that we have grades, that we have information to base our instructional plans for that child or our therapy plans for that child in the future. We can provide data sheets to caregivers so that they can take data when doing activities or running programs when we're not there. Once they become comfortable doing that, I always do that. My students in my classroom, my virtual classroom, I have parents who are running session with them, who are running targets with them that I've given them instructions on how to do in my classroom, because these are students who cannot access the screen. They really need hands-on. I'll have a Zoom with them where I will be telling their parents, coaching them how to go about running a session. And then on the 2 days when I'm not doing a Zoom, an individual Zoom with that kiddo and that caregiver, the caregiver can run the programs that we've been doing that I've been guiding them through. I make the data sheets very simple for the caregivers. They're, for the most part, not paraprofessionals or teachers who are used to taking data. I'll explain, I'll take a telehealth session just with the parent, or a Google Hangout session just with the parent to explain exactly how to take data. I share the data sheet on the screen so that we can go over all of the different pieces. And I always make sure that I'm available for feedback. During the telehealth sessions, the teacher or the therapist, the behavior technician should be taking data during telehealth sessions. You should be writing down what the prompt level is. If the person's correct, if the client's correct or incorrect, if you need, so you can go back and you can make adjustments that you need to, and you can have that documentation for the grade or the level that you're putting in the progress report, and you have information to decide about where you're going with goals and objectives when you are at the point where you're doing a reassessment or you're getting ready for a new IEP. I share in my Google Classroom as an assignment a daily summary form, and the daily summary form is an area where the parents indicate caregivers indicate what activities they've engaged with in the child from the lesson plan, what things went well, what things didn't go so well, and It's an area for them to give me some feedback so that I know if they need help on something. It is also a way to document interaction in the classroom. As a classroom teacher, I'm sure that you all have gotten some pressure, like I have, reasonable pressure to document our students' interaction in the classroom. We're supposed to be documenting what's happening, documenting that instruction is really taking place, and having that daily summary form filled out every day gives you information that the student was there and what they accessed in the classroom while they were there. Next slide, please. So social emotional learning is very important. It's an integral part of many curriculum right now, prior to COVID. In addition, during COVID, social emotional learning becomes even more important because of the extra stress that students and families are in. So social emotional learning is defined as the process through which students and clients acquire and effectively apply the knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and to make responsible decisions. Social emotional learning is defined as the process through which students and clients acquire and effectively apply the knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals. Next slide, please. So what does social emotional learning include? It includes self-awareness. So what is self-awareness? It's a realistic understanding of his or her strengths and limitations and a consistent desire for self-improvement. Self-management. So what's self-management? That's a client's success in controlling his or her emotions and behaviors to complete a task or to succeed in a new or challenging situation. Social awareness, a client's capacity to interact with others in a way that shows respect for their ideas and behaviors, recognizes his or her impact on them, and uses cooperation and tolerance in social situations. Relationship skills, a client's consistent performance of socially acceptable actions that promote and maintain positive connections with others. Next slide, please. Goal-directed behavior. Goal-directed behavior is something that our kiddos on the autism spectrum have specific difficulty with. That's a client's initiation and persistence in completing tasks of varying difficulty. It is very difficult for individuals on the autism spectrum to set a goal and then be able to go about planning and being persistent in the steps to achieve that goal. Personal responsibility, a client's tendency to be careful and reliable in his or her actions and in contributing to group efforts. Decision making, a client's approach to problem solving that involves learning from others and his or her own previous experiences, using values to guide and to accept responsibility for his or her decisions. Optimistic thinking, a client's attitude of confidence, hopefulness, positive thinking regarding himself or herself and his or her life situations in the past, present, and future. Next slide, please. So how do we target social emotional learning through the telehealth platform? Because all of those different areas are very dense and require many steps to be able to be successful in helping a student or a client be able to achieve a level of mastery in those areas. So we can target the concepts and skills necessary for social emotional learning through telehealth, through accessing streaming videos on the platform for the therapist and client to access and to interact with. An example is if I'm teaching a client or a student about the concept of personal space, I'm going to go onto YouTube and I'm going to find a video. It's fairly easy to do it. You can just type in keywords and they'll come up. You need to preview the video before you put it in your lesson plans to make sure that it doesn't contain anything that's inappropriate. A good example of the way that this works well is there is a video clip from Seinfeld about a close talker. So it approaches it from a comedic avenue, and in the clip, there's somebody who's a close talker, and you can talk with your client about why people are uncomfortable, what's going on with that, and then be able to share the other targets, the information that you've been using with your client when you're not on telehealth. There are specific videos, instructional videos that are available on YouTube for personal space that are very effective. So I encourage you to go through and to see the ones that you would fit best with your individual client and use those as a jumping off point to discuss those topics. It's easier to access that through a visual than to describe it. A lot of our higher functioning kiddos are really great at doing workbook lessons, and they can tell you all about how social skills runs. But when you have them in the position where they're engaging in it or they're looking at it, they're less able to explain it or to understand it. Empathy and emotion identification and perspective taking also lend themselves to the use of videos depicting those concepts for the therapist or teacher and client to view and discuss. There are wonderful YouTube clips of emotions and being able to identify the emotion, what was the cause, what happened. Stop the video and talk about why the person might feel that way, what the person might do next. Do you think that that would be a good thing to happen? What do you think might be something that might happen that's not going to have a good end? What do you think that's something that's going to happen that is going to have a good consequence that the person's going to be successful with? Perspective taking. There's videos where you can view one thing and then the participant, your client, and you can discuss your different perspectives on it. The practice of being able to identify emotions and to identify different perspectives and identify personal space on videos is good practice for doing it in real life. So what I do when I'm focusing on those social skills with the kiddo and I'm using video modeling, I'm going to work with the parent to also have them practice that through telehealth sessions and throughout their day so that they're linking the video modeling to what's actually happening in the moment in their life. Video modeling of social skills enables clients to learn those skills through observation and then practice. When we are back out in the real world, we can watch a video of a play theme of a child engaging with trains or in a play kitchen or with puppets or pretending to be a doctor. We can watch the video with the client, with the student, and then have them be able to engage in those activities with their peers. But social emotional learning is specifically successful when we access it through the telehealth platform, because video modeling works very, very well with our students. Next slide, please. So targeting the concepts and skills necessary for social emotional learning through telehealth can be accessed through the curriculum content and exercises, workbook sheets that we typically use on the platform for the clients to access and interact with. So after accessing a video and talking about it, I will stream content. I'll have created a Google Doc with a curriculum a social skills curriculum that I'm using, and I'll stream that on the screen. I also sometimes drop off or mail the program materials so that the client or the child can work directly and write directly onto the sheets, or we can just discuss it on the screen, and that works well too. So we can go through the different exercises and link them to the videos that we've watched. So any of the materials that you already have, you can scan and then create a Google Doc, and you can stream that. You can share it onto your Zoom screen, or you can share it in your Google Classroom. It allows the programming that is already in place to be used on the platform. So we don't have to create it from scratch. You can go in. There are many options for buying things from teacher-paid teachers or through other venues that you can digitally access straight through, and that you don't have to create a document for, but it's really not that difficult. If you're having trouble with Google Docs, or it's something that you're just not familiar with, I suggest that you go to YouTube and find a YouTube tutorial and go through it very slowly and teach yourself how to do it. It's not so difficult once you've gone through it a couple times to create a Google Doc and to be able to utilize it in your classroom or to share it on a screen. And that just opens, it just opens the telehealth up to the materials that you already have, so that you're not running out and trying to buy digital versions of things. We really don't need to recreate the wheel. We just have to change the way that we're accessing that information. So if you are a teacher and you have your materials home, I brought some home and I was able to go back to my building and get them, so that I have touch math worksheets and I have Edmark books and Edmark worksheets that I'm able to use. I have Explode the Code worksheets, different materials that I've used in my classroom, all of the different social skills curriculum that I've used, power solving, and some other ones. I've created Google Docs with them so that I can share them with my clients and my students directly. And then you'll have that for the future. I imagine that we are going to be doing some combination of telehealth services and face-to-face services for some time moving forward. Next slide, please. So this is an example of a lesson plan that I have. It's like the front half of it. It goes on and on and on. But this is an example of how I set up the different activities for my students to access through their screens in my interactive classroom. So I have students who specifically have difficulty accessing the information on the screen. So I am providing boom cards for them that are specifically targeting the goals and the objectives in their IEP. So what's missing, that boom card, they can click on it and they'll be able to put a nose in a face or a tail in a dog. They can specifically interact with the screen. Their iPads work really wonderfully, so you can either touch it and move it depending upon your screen, or you can use the mouse pad to do it. I have a calendar that my kiddos can access, an errorless shape. So for that one student, he is a very, very early learner. And for that student, he's just moving over the same shape to the other shape. So I have my students access the information. Their parents know that their initial is by the activity that I want them to do. So it's straight up very easy for them to go in and do that. The lesson plan follows a longer path, and at the bottom of it, which you can't see, are the curriculum materials. So the kiddos who are higher functioning in the class, they're being assigned work in Edmark or work in touch math. So I'm giving them specific pages that they're gonna click on, and they're gonna, some of them I have as a Google form where they can interact with it straight on the computer and write the answer in. Some of them are just Google or just pages, and their parents print them out and they can access them that way. For my students whose parents don't have an ability to print them out, I have them upload the workbook page on the screen, click on it on the screen, and then I have the child just write the answers on a separate piece of paper. The parents are dating those assignments, signing them, putting them to the side, and then when we come back to school, they're going to bring them in. During the daily summary form, when they fill that in, they let me know what percent the child got correct. You know, YA or ZA was able to do 8 of the 10 touch math addition problems correctly. So they give me specific information so that I can, if they haven't done it in a way and submitted it so that I have a grade for them, I can document it that way. Not all parents, not all kiddos are responding in such a way that I can see their grade. They're not submitting it. They're only going through the daily summary form. So I'm creating a grade grid for them that way. With my other guys, where it's a boom card, where it's something that's more basic, like letter ID A or errorless matching or what's missing, I'm having the parent indicate to me how many times they've gotten it correct, and I'm tracking it on a data sheet. I also, because I'm doing direct Zoom instruction with my students who are early learners, I take data during that part of instruction so that I have data that I have observed on my own. With science, a great way to bring in science, you may have curriculum that you can do Google Docs for, but a great way to bring it in is to utilize Brain Pop or Brain Pop Junior. You can Google that. They're free right now. So you have a science video, a social studies video. They also have reading and language. You can go in, you can assign a video for them to watch, and then they have different activities they can do with them. I generally give one science and one social studies for every 2-day period. And then on Fridays is we have virtual field trips that we do, and then any work that somebody hasn't gotten done, they can finish it then. Daily living skills, I give very specific instructions. Students going to be able to get dressed, set the table, be able to eat at the table, clear the table, brush their teeth. I provided a social story for eating at the table, and I provided a social story for brushing their teeth. If you set up a grid like this and you go in and create links, so you can create a link to Brain Pop, you can create a link to your boom card, then you can have your kiddos interact directly on the screen, and it's more engaging. You can also assign specific things for the student. Sorry, my lawn neighbor is having their lawn mowed, and I can't have them not mow it. Sorry for the background noise. So that's an example of a lesson plan. So I have some links for you. So brainpop.com. Another thing that's great to assign in your lesson plans is GoNoodle. So GoNoodle, a lot of you probably have used GoNoodle in your classroom, so your kids can get out of their seat, a brain break, get up and dance. They can choose the different videos. That's there. The other COVID-19 toolkit, if you put that into a Google search, that'll come up from Easter Seals. The COVID-19 toolkit gives you pages of communication packs. It gives you token boards. There are lots of supports that can be printed out. You can use that as a tool, a resource to give to your families. Support for caregivers and staff. The Affirm modules, you go into Google and you put Affirm modules in, a website will come up. When the Affirm modules let you go in and register. It's free. You can go in and register and get specific instruction on prompting and errorless teaching, all of the different things that we do. It gives the parents an ability to learn about those things. It gives the caregivers, it gives teachers and paraprofessionals an opportunity to hone their skills that they're using. Next slide, please. So resources for creating online materials. Most of us are using Google Classroom, and in Google Classroom, we use Google Docs, Google Assignments, and Google Forms. There's also Google Sheets. If you are having difficulty accessing or understanding Google Classroom, you can reach out for support in your specific district, or you can go ahead and go on YouTube. There are great videos, there are good tutorials, there are also good pen and paper materials that you can read through that have steps for it. What I found for some of my colleagues who are having difficulty with them, they'll print out the printed materials that you can access online, and then they'll look at that and they'll watch the tutorial. And while they look at the list of instructions, and then they'll go and give it a try themselves. If you happen to have an ability to have 2 computers at home, the way that I taught myself how to graph in Excel when I was in an ABA grad program was I had 2 Macs next to each other, and I had the YouTube tutorial on one while I was doing my graphing on the other, because you could stop and pause it and then go forward again so that you could go nice and slowly. Next slide, please. So using videos. So we already talked a lot about how using videos can be very engaging and can be a way to teach students and clients through video modeling. A way for you to put yourself into your classroom is to create video of yourself reading a story. So I usually have a story that I've recorded of myself, from myself reading a book. I like to read the book myself. I have used Pete the Cat and other ones that I have streamed in from YouTube, but when I read the story myself, I can pause and put the book up to the screen and give a direction to the student. So if I am working with receptive ID with my kiddos, and I know that they're not going to be able really to answer WH questions because they're nonverbal, I can put the book up to the screen and ask them to touch the different items. I can ask them a WH question and they can find the answer, a who question or a where question in the book, even though they can't answer me vocally. So it's a wonderful way to be able to interact with your clients or your students in a way that is more interactive with them and with their specific needs. You can create a video of yourself teaching a lesson. You can teach the lesson to your students. You can have the materials that are there. You can stop and give specific instructions. You can tailor it specifically to your lesson. So not only are you assigning something, but you are also being able to teach it. Preschool teachers, I've seen them do really great jobs with reading a story and then doing an arts and crafts project where they're doing the arts and crafts project at home and their kiddos are in Google Hangout doing it with them. It's very interactive. It can be a lot of fun. The way for that to be accessed is for you to make sure that the parents know what materials they need ahead of time. You can, it's very easy with an iPhone or another device to record directly onto your phone, to download Google Docs onto your phone, and you can upload that. You can upload that video straight into Google Docs and it will show up in your drive, and then you can just import it into your classroom. Many of us have used, we have started using videos with parents who are having a lot of difficulty with doing prompting. I've created videos with myself and my granddaughter and my husband, where I'm giving my husband directions on how to prompt my granddaughter through an activity that their child would be doing at home, so that they could have a visual for what to do. So you can really tailor your videos for what your specific needs are. Next video, next slide, please. So at this point, any questions that anyone has, any specific questions that we could chat about and give some answers to?
Yes, we have many questions that have come in. So if people have additional questions, they are welcome to type them in the chat box or in the Q&A, but I've got a couple pages of questions already, so you might want to see if your question is asked. And we'll go through as many questions as we can during this time, but if we're not able to get to your question, I'll work with Cindy afterwards and we'll see if we can put together some responses. So I wanted to start with the question that we're getting the most, which is around, there's several slightly different takes on this question, but they're really all getting at the question about how do you do this work? How should you approach working with the student when the parents are either not engaging, for whatever reason they're working, they're not available, or they might have language. If they're not proficient in English, they might have challenges around language, or they have challenges with the technology, or a host of other issues. But how should you be approaching this work if parents are less engaged with the students?
One of the ways that I try to get parents to be more engaged with the student is to communicate with them directly, not just when we're having a Google Hangout or when I'm setting up a Zoom. So I specifically call them to find out what the difficulties are. We have had my administrator from my building actually go out wearing a mask and gloves to help a family get their computer, get things to function. We have had parents pick up Chromebooks from the school, and then we've given them specific information about free internet when that was an issue. We have access in our school for translators. So I can have documents translated for parents, and I can have communication translated for parents who are having difficulties with it. For parents who have children who are a little more difficult to get on the screen, I modify the sessions. I really modify them. The other thing I've done is I've had the parent, instead of having it be like a telehealth screen, I've had them use their phone and earbuds. And I've just told them specifically what to do while they were working with their child, if it wasn't working with the screen itself. There are going to be a percentage of families who we are going to have more difficulty with them accessing telehealth, especially if there are behavioral challenges. One of the things that I make sure to do is to chat with families who have self-injurious or behavioral children about a safety plan, about what do we do if we have a kiddo who's out of control. So I just tried to really meet them outside of the telehealth or virtual classroom to get an understanding of what their needs are and to provide supports for families where I found that they just didn't have materials at home. I have dropped off materials. So it's been a contactless drop off where I've dropped off the materials and texted and I made sure that they were cleaned, they were sterilized. I used Lysol spray. I dropped them off at the home and then texted the parent that they were right outside so that they could pull them out. With some of our families who have less access to things, they might not have some of the things at home that we're asking them to use. If it's a family who's struggling with printing things out, I've dropped packets off or mailed packets to their homes to match the lessons that are on the virtual classroom.
Sorry, I have to remember to unmute myself here. Thank you for that. There are also a series of questions about consent. So I'm going to try and capture several of them here, but most of them are really getting at, do you need separate consent if this is if this is necessary for academic instruction, and or if it's part of the IEP. So one person is saying that their district communicated that the IEP is considered consent. So people are asking about consent through school, or if that's just required for more kind of clinical telehealth sessions.
So consent is not necessary. A consent form is not necessary for a virtual classroom. It is part of the IEP. A caveat to that is, if for some reason the district is wanting to document progress via recording a virtual classroom session, that requires consent. You can't record the instruction. You can't record what's going on in a virtual classroom without specific consent, written consent from the parents. When we're talking about therapy or ABA services that are provided outside of the public school or private school environment, consent is absolutely necessary. All of the insurance companies and the state perform care. So there are some children who receive ABA services through perform care, either through CMOs or MCOs. Medicaid requires a telehealth consent form, and all other private insurances also require a consent form, but not the regular school systems, except for recording.
Great, thank you for that clarification. Okay, I'm going to try and move through some of these others. There was a question about engaging, well, there was a question about at what age can telehealth begin for a child with autism? And a similar question about how do I engage a child as young as 6 to 8 years old with ADHD and on the spectrum? So any suggestions about that, either how young or for the younger children, how do you engage?
So my youngest client that I do telehealth with is a 4-year-old. I have many clients who are in the 5 to 8 range. The way that you engage them is to have materials that are familiar to them and utilize those materials. So if it does not work for them to sit and engage with the screen, you guide the caregiver to run the program that you ordinarily run and to provide reinforcement. And that's the piece of it that's very important. So you're going to make a very playful session where the caregiver is interacting with the child in a playful way. And then you're going to fade in the demands, and you're going to give the caregiver the direction, the vocal direction, in order what to ask the child, how to prompt the child. So an example is, I have a nonverbal 5-year-old who is an early learner. So he's working on putting pieces into a puzzle or receptively identifying a picture card. So I'll tell the parent, have him sit down, I'm just going to use a name. It's not his real name. Have Sam sit, have him sit at the table, get his attention, quiet sitting, look at me, put 3 items out, put the 3 cards out, ask him, give me the cup. And if he doesn't get the cup, I'm saying, oh, pull them away. We're going to put them out again, put the pictures out. Now, remember, you're going to have to prompt him. You're going to have to help him get that right away as soon as you ask it. Give me the cup. The caregiver picks the hand up, gets the cup, and I say, good job. Give the little piece of pretzel. Now let's do that a couple more times. And do it a couple more times, and then I'll say, now let's give him a chance to try to do that on his own again without you helping him. Now lay out all the 3 cards, ask him, give me cup. She does that, he hands her the cup, and I say, now give him the pretzel, great job. Oh, Sam, that was wonderful. Giving cup, yes, that is a cup. What do we do with a cup? We drink. So I'm gonna give very specific direction to the caregiver or the person who's running that session in order for that. So that person is going to be my hands. If ordinarily I have a young learner and I have to do a lot of prompting, I have to do a lot of physical directing the child in order to be able to get the child to be correct, and then I fade it back, I'm going to give very specific direction to the caregiver to be my hands. And I'm going to make sure that I intersperse a lot of fun stuff in between. So you may be getting to less of your programs, but you're going to be more successful if you make these sessions as easy as you can on the person who's learning to engage with it. And after the parent or the caregiver has been doing it a while, you can up the number of programs. You just have to work with them for their comfort level. So they really have to be your hands. For my higher functioning kiddos who are ADD and they're interacting with material on the screen, I find out what they like on what YouTube or what other stuff they're engaging with on their screen, on their iPad. And I stream pieces of that in between, and that helps keep their focus. Next question.
Great. We had a few questions about boom cards. So I'm wondering if you could just take a very brief moment to give a little bit more of a description about them. And then the other question is, are they free or is there a fee?
So this is a situation with boom cards. Boom cards you can access through putting them in, search boom cards, go to the address, and then you make a profile. There are a lot of free boom cards. But then there are boom cards that cost money. So they create it so that it's points. So you buy a certain number of points. So say I spent $50, that would buy me probably 5,000 points. And the activities range like from 5 points to 20 points to 360 points. They're all over the place as to how many points they're going to cost you. When I first started using boom cards, I primarily used all of the free ones, and I bought some. The thing with the free ones is you have to make sure that they work correctly, because sometimes the free ones have some hitches in them. So I run through them before that I assign them so that I know that they work. You can also create your own boom cards. And when you create your own boom cards, you can personalize those boom cards so that they are directly effective for your student or your kid. I have a 5-year-old who loves Frozen. So the background that we do on all the boom cards is some version of Frozen. And then when she gets to the end of the boom card, the reinforcement is that there's a little snippet, a video with a song from Frozen or a song from somewhere else. So you can personalize a boom card to be whatever you want it to be. It can be more complicated where you're talking about social skills with a higher functioning kid, or it can be very specific where you're having a child choose, you're having 3 pictures up on the screen and you're telling them to find the apple. and they're touching the apple and they click it, says, makes a sound, good job, and then the next one comes in. You can be sequencing numbers, you can be doing addition and subtraction, you can be doing letter ID. So there are a ton of different boom cards to choose from, and you can make your own. You can make your own. There are tutorials to help you. It took me, I'd say, 8 hours to figure it out. I'm not that technologically savvy. So for some of you, it might not take you as long, but I did it through a tutorial. But until you become proficient with it, you're probably going to be able to find a boom card that pretty much suits what you're looking for. And the thing about the boom card is it turns the computer screen into an interactive vehicle. So the boom card, the child is going to answer right on the screen. They're going to use the mouse to select the correct answer, or they're going to be able to touch it directly and select the answer, so that you can have them engage directly with your material in an interactive way that is specifically designed for them. Next question.
Okay, so there's a couple questions about groups, doing something, working with groups of students. So any suggestions on providing services to groups of students? And if you have groups of students in which parents are involved, how do you manage consent and privacy?
You would manage consent and privacy through a consent form. So if you're having a group, you have to have a consent form. The parent has to consent that, except when we're talking about a virtual classroom, except when we're talking about a school system, because in Google Hangout, or if you're just accessing certain groups of students in your class, you don't need a consent form for that. But if you are providing a social skills group, if you're providing therapy, if you're doing something like that and you're going through it's an insurance company or it's through the state, those you're going to need specific consent forms. I talk with my parents and the participants about what are the rules for the group, and you can manage the group by muting participants sometimes, so that you're targeting one person answering at a time. You can play certain games interactively on the screen with different kiddos participating. You can definitely run social groups. It ends up kind of being like Brady Bunch if you're doing the Zoom version. So I explained to the kiddos exactly how we're going about running the group, but groups, you can access groups on the telehealth platform as well as you can just access individual. A lot of times in a classroom, if you have a virtual classroom and you have different groups of students, you can do a Google Hangout invitation just for that group of students. If you have that group that are pulled aside and they're working on certain things, or you're working with social skills with this group of kids, you can in Google Hangout, you can invite just the students that you want. So you can target those things with those students. Next question. Next question.
I'm sorry, I lost you there for a moment. Do you have any examples of interactive games that you might use in those situations?
There's, trying to remember what the name of it is. There's a clue game. There's also Connect 4. There's Tic-Tac-Toe. There's I'm not being able to pull the name of it up. It's the game where you try to guess who the person on the other side of the screen has. So you ask them what color, do they have red hair? Do they have black hair? Is it a girl? Is it a boy? Do they wear glasses? So if you go on Google and you do a search for interactive games, for interactive digital games, those will come up and you can choose them.
Great. One of the participants is saying, guess who? Is that
Guess
what
who?
it's-
Thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Very good. Okay, and we have many, many questions, but I'm trying to be mindful of the time as well. Let's see, I'm trying to find questions that there are multiple ones about. So there were some follow-up questions again, and I don't know if you have any more to add on this or not, but there were just some follow-up questions about the parental involvement, and just, do you have any suggestions around engaging learners whose parents are not part of the equation? So if that's not really an option.
If the parents are not part of the equation, and you can engage the child on the screen, then you can engage them on the screen. But given our certain circumstances, if you are not able to do it, if the parent cannot facilitate that, then it's going to be kind of hard to do telehealth with that. I have many clients, not through school, but I have many clients that I'm supervising their cases where we're still providing face-to-face services. So I have been, I have PPE where, we're using masks and gloves and hand sanitizer, but we are still going into some homes because it's just really been impossible for those families to access therapy, to access ABA via the telehealth screen. So we've actually still been providing face-to-face services. I have had a couple clients where the telehealth did not work out, and we ended up going back to face-to-face because there was just not a way to keep the client engaged in the activity, or the parent was just not coachable. So there's really no magic answer, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're able to, as an agency, still provide face-to-face, and, with the Family Resource Network, we're still providing face-to-face. Most of the agencies who take insurance still are going out for clients as well. They're providing telehealth, but they're still also doing direct services.
Yes, when needed.
When needed.
Yeah. So there's some requests for some examples of forms, etc. So you and I can discuss later if you have any examples, and if we can, we will pull together some of those additional resources. We do have a resource list that will that we'll be sharing and putting on our website, and we'll make sure to include all of the links that are in the PowerPoint, so that you can access them that way. So I'm sorry we don't have the opportunity to get to all of the questions. We appreciate everybody for their engagement and interest. I know this is a challenging time for providing these services. I want to thank Cindy for being so responsive to all of these questions. I will share the questions with Cindy, and we'll see if we can't pull together some additional responses to some of the questions that were posed that we didn't have an opportunity to get to. So again, I want to thank all of the participants for being here and being so engaged. I want to thank Cindy again for her expertise and her education during this time. Thank you, Cindy. As was mentioned, you'll all receive an email with a link to our brief survey. We really appreciate you filling that out. You'll also receive a link to a recording of this webinar, the slides, the resource document, and any Q&A responses that we pull together. So thank you again for your time and attention. Be well, and take some time to take care of yourself during what I know is a challenging time for you all. Thank you again.
Thank you.